Hi and welcome back to a beginner's guide to Toon Boom Harmony. Today I'll be showing you the basics of the transform tool, how to do cutout animation with it, and finish with a little example of how I animate a simple bouncing ball. So, to get an introduction to the fundamentals of cutout animation, the first thing we're going to do in our new scene is to create a circle and fill it with one color. Then we're just going to extend this drawing over the 60 frames of animations that we have, and we're going to animate this over the 60 frames here without changing the drawing and without having to redraw it. And to do that, we're going to use the transform tool, which is right here. And the way it works is when you select a drawing, whether it's from the layer or the camera view, it lets you do the same modification you could do with the select tool. So that is scaling, rotation, skewing, and drag it around. So nothing new here. The difference is, contrary to the select tool, when you select something with the transform tool, it will transform everything in the layer. If I add a few random brush strokes here, the select tool can select them separately, but the transform tool will always select everything on that layer, and we'll see why. And that is what is going to help us with cutout animation. So first thing that you can see is that everything happens around the pivot point here, which is not what we want here because it's not at the center of the circle. In order for this to be more natural to animate, we would want this pivot point to be on the center of this circle. The way you want to change the position of the pivot point, you'd think at first that with the transform tool you would just drag it at the center here, but you see there's still this transparent version of the pivot point here. And while it works here, if you deselect and reselect here, the pivot point is back to its original position. To change its position definitely, you use this tool here, the rotate tool, and you can see in the description, can also permanently move a layer's pivot point. So we take this and we try to place it as close as we can on the center. We go back with transform tool, and now we can see the pivot point has been moved indefinitely, and we can, if we want, go back with this and change it again, but there's no point in doing this here. So you see that because I've moved around my circle, there is this red dot that appeared here on the timeline. This dot is a keyframe, and the way it works, the way Toon Boom handles keyframes, it stores information based on position, rotation, skewing, and scaling. And you can see if I hit the plus here next to the layer, that the frame has also applied to all these values. The value positions, angle, which is rotation, scaling, and skewing. And what this means is, at this point on the timeline, on frame 1, the values for all these parameters are these ones, and they are saved on this point. And if I go at the 60th frame of my timeline and change position, rotation, scaling, and skewing, the values are different. You can see the value here are completely different from what you see here. And you can see that this black line has appeared all across my timeline. This black line is because the keyframe I created here is by default a motion keyframe, which means that between this point and this point, the software is going to create automatically all the in-betweens between the 2 points. And you can see that if I extend this again, over time it changes all these values at the same time. And essentially, this is the very basics of cutout animation. And from this, we can create animation that is not relying on drawing the elements over and over again. It's a different type of animation, and it works with its own techniques and its own laws in a way. It's still the basic theory of animations, like the 12 basic principles and all that, still apply in cutout animation, but in practice it's a bit different because you get a part of the in-betweening done by the computer. So if you want to create a keyframe, like you can see here, when I changed the values of position, rotation, skew and angle on the last frame, it automatically created a keyframe. But if you just want to create a keyframe that will just have the values here, let's say, you press F6 and you see it creates a dot, which is a keyframe. And this keyframe can thus store other value. So let's say I want, in the end, things to be a bit different here. We'll see that my circle goes from this point to this point and to this point. If you want to remove a keyframe, it's F7. And we're back to the movements we had in the beginning. So I'm going to remove this keyframe here, and I'm going to show you something else in Toon Boom. First I'm going to make this a bit smaller, make this ball go all across the screen, and I'm going to duplicate it 3 times and show you how to use change of speed, which is normally called velocity, to give a bit more appeal to what we animate. So first I'm going to duplicate this 3 times. And to move my duplicate layers, because if I were to move, let's say on drawing 3, the ball lower, because the second keyframe is here, the change I made here only applies to the first keyframe. To make sure that the change I want to do on a layer apply to all its keyframes, I need to deactivate this, which is the animate option in the left toolbar. And by deactivating this, you can see that the square in which the element selected is turns red. By activating this, every change that I make to a layer or a drawing layer applies on all timeline. So what I have here is 4 circles that travel the same distance at the same speed all the time. What we're going to do is use a change of velocity to have it either accelerate or slow down, or a mix of the two. So we're going to keep the first one at the same speed, which is this one. And for this one, let's say I want it to start slowly and then go faster. To do that, you have two options. Either you go here, which is the, let's say, the velocity curve of your key, or you do it manually here. And I'll show you first manually so you can see what these curves mean. So I'm going to select first keyframe of the element I want to change the velocity of. I go into this here, set is for multiple parameters, and it opens a curve, and this curve is a Bezier curve, and what this curve represents is the distance traveled by our element between this frame here, which is represented here, and the next frame, which is this one. And we can see that over the 60 frames, each goes at the same speed. Horizontally, we can see the number of frames, and vertically, we can see the distance traveled. If I wanted this to start slow and go faster, what I would do is pull this towards the timeline, and we can see that at first it travels very little distance, and as time goes on, it travels a lot more distance per frame. We hit apply, and when we play the animation, we can see that it starts very slowly, it's dragging behind compared to the others, and then it goes very fast near the end, and it still reaches the same point on the 60th frame. And we can see that and if you see the shape of the curve here, you can basically have the same effect by choosing a curve here which looks similar, which would be one of these three. And we can see that the effect would be less or more intense depending on which curve you were to choose here. So, third circle, I'm going to make it start really fast and end slower. So again, I select the first frame, I go into the set is for multiple parameters, and I'm going to do the opposite, which is travel a lot of distance at the beginning and then slow down. And the way you do it is by more or less inverting the curve. If I pull this up and create a Bezier that goes this way, we can see that in the first few frames it travels a lot of distance, and then in the last few frames it goes very slowly. We hit apply, close, and it does exactly that. It starts off really fast and then slows down. And again, we saw how this curve looks, so instead of going there, we can achieve a similar effect using one of these curves. And we can see that this curve was created here and automatically creates the... Whenever you click here on one of the curves, the curve will be created for the in-betweening that you have selected. So last one, what I'm going to do is something that's pretty common in cutout, and it is start slowly, have a lot of speed in the middle, and end slowly. So we're going to have to use this time both points, because I'm going to change the parameter here to start slowly, but I don't have access to the parameters here to get some kind of S curve like I want it to be. So I hit apply next, and as you can see with the cursor on the timeline here, it takes me to the next keyframe on the timeline, and here we can see the part of the curve that was already created on the previous keyframes. It's the same curve here and here, and there I can pull this way to get this S shape. And this S shape means it starts slowly on the first 20 frames. On the 20 frames in the middle, it's going to go really fast, and on the last 20 frames, it's going to decelerate a lot. So we close it, and we see it does exactly that. Starts slow, go fast, and ends very slow. And you can see how just with changing the value of ease, you can create some variation of speed in your animation, which will give it a lot more appeal. And again, this is a type of curve that you can find here, which is this S type of curve. And if we go into the parameters, we can see how it was created. So now that I've shown the fundamentals of cutout animation, I'm going to use the concepts I showed here to just animate a simple bouncing ball. So I'm going to take this same shape I did for the exercise, and I'm going to animate it over 25 frames, which should be enough for a simple bouncing ball. First, for the first pose, I'm just going to make sure there is a keyframe at the beginning by hitting F6, and I'm going to make my second pose on, let's say, frame 13. So I bring this lower, I hold Shift to make sure it goes down vertically. And the first problem here is I don't want it to create the interpolation for now. I want first to have just keyframe after keyframe. I don't want the position between each keyframe to be calculated. So to deactivate this, which we call a motion keyframe, and to make it into what we call in Toon Boom a stop motion keyframe, you can either hit this button, set stop motion keyframe, or with the shortcut Control L, which does same thing. And if you want to set it back to being a motion keyframe, you hit this button here or Control K. But what I want is, by default, I want my keyframe to be stop motion keyframes. And to do that, you go into Edit Preferences, General, and check stop motion keyframes. This, in my opinion, is more useful on the long run. So, first I have my first pose here, my second pose here. I'm going to squash it a bit, trying to keep the volume. If you need, you can activate the onion skin, which works the same way it would with drawing animation. So I have my two key poses. I'm going to copy this pose here to make sure that my ball goes back in its place. And from this, I'm going to create a few breakdowns. So I'm going to reactivate the onion skin, show next frame, stretch it on the way down, and same thing on the way up. So now I have my basic frames, my keyframes for these animations, and from this now I start to make these keyframes into stop motion keyframes. So we're going to make this with one keyframe at a time. So first I'm going to select this one, Control K to make it a motion keyframe, and I want this to accelerate as it's going down. It's gaining speed because of gravity. So I'm either going to go into set ease parameters and pull this to create these curves, which means less distance traveled at the beginning and more as we go on. Or other option is just to give it this curve here, which is the acceleration curve. Start slow and go faster over time, which does the same effect. We can see it starts slow and goes faster as it goes down. Now, second keyframe, which is this one. I hit Ctrl K again to get the interpolation made, and between this point and this point I want it to slow down towards this squash position, which is kind of one of the extremes of this animation. So for it to slow down, I select this frame and select the slow down curve, which is this one at the bottom. And we get exactly that. So starts slow, accelerates, goes fast, and then slows down toward this squashed pose. Now I'm doing the exact opposite, which is from this to this. I want to start slow and accelerate as it gains back momentum but upwards. So Control K, and again this curve here, which starts slow and goes faster. And now, last one, Control K here. From this pose to this pose, because of gravity, we need to go slower. So, this curve here. And now I have my basic bouncing ball. And that covers the fundamentals you need to know to start doing some cutout animation. This chapter is a bit dense but extremely important to assimilate before we move on. I suggest doing the bouncing ball animation for yourself and try to animate another one with different properties to make sure you understand the whole concept of ease and speed variation. Join me next time as we go a little further into cutout animation. Until then, take care.